You were never supposed to hear this. In 1834, two little girls arrived in the Kentucky hills, and within 3 days they destroyed everything the town believed about God, reality, and the human mind. Now, let's begin. They called it Pine Hollow, but maps from the 1800s don't show it. Just a bend in the mountain, hidden between crags and shadow. The kind of place where silence wasn't just quiet. It was watched. The town itself had no sheriff, no doctor, just 197 souls, one church, and a pastor whose only job was to keep the chaos of the world outside, where it belonged. But on November 15th, 1834, chaos walked in on 2 feet. The Morrison twins, 9 years old, identical down to the curve of their smiles. But the moment they opened their mouths, grown men trembled. Rebecca and Rachel. They didn't guess things. They didn't sense the future. They spoke it. Names, dates, sins, whispered in locked bedrooms. Affairs, buried bodies, missing children, words carved into coffins, long since rotted. They knew. And not in the way that makes for good stories, in the way that gets pastors to burn journals, in the way that drives doctors to drink and widows to scream in the middle of prayer. Every secret they spoke, proven, documented, verifiable. Now ask yourself, what kind of force moves through 2 children like that? The people of Pine Hollow thought they were witnessing God's wrath, but this wasn't divine. It was older, sharper, less interested in saving you, and more interested in exposing you. Because some truths don't come to heal. They come to divide, to burn the veil between the life you think you're living and the one that's watching you live it. This story isn't about religion, it's about control. And the ancient systems buried beneath the surface of faith, law, and science. Systems that don't protect you, they monitor you. You're not here being
the accident. You've been led to this moment for a reason. But before you go deeper, understand, once this door opens, it doesn't close. Because after today, you'll never look at children or secrets the same way again.
By the second day, the town wasn't afraid of the twins. They were afraid of what the twins might say next. It started with the church bell. At exactly 3:12 a.m., it rang 3 times. No wind, no storm, just sound cutting through blackness like a warning. When Pastor Elijah Worthing climbed the belfry, he found no intruder. Only the Morrison twins standing barefoot in the grass, heads tilted toward the moon. Smiling, waiting. By morning, they had spoken again. "He's under the floor," Rebecca said to the butcher's wife. And he was. Walter Hemmings, missing 6 years, curled like a broken doll beneath the butcher shop. When they dug him out, the twins didn't flinch. They didn't look. They just turned and walked away. From that moment, Pine Hollow was no longer a town. It was a confessional. Every porch became a tribunal, every home a trial. Because the girls didn't just know the past, they weaponized it. They whispered in threes, always in threes, names, places, sins. Never loud, never cruel, just precise. One woman hanged herself before noon. 2 men fled into the woods and were never seen again. And Pastor Worthing? He locked the church and claimed he had no key. But it was too late. The thing that kept the town sane was silence. Silence about what grandfathers did in the war. Silence about what really happened on baptism night. Silence about where the missing went and why the water from the eastern well tasted like blood. The twins didn't break that silence. They annihilated it. And here's what no one talks about. It wasn't just the knowledge that haunted people. It was the exactness, the precision, as if something was observing, cataloguing, and now, finally, speaking. Not guessing, not divine inspiration, not madness. Data, like a ledger from something older than law, older than language, finally being read aloud. Now stop, ask yourself, what kind of intelligence holds that much human filth for that long? And more importantly, why release it through children? Something had chosen them. Or perhaps something had returned, because by the 3rd day the twins began asking questions. Those questions weren't for the townspeople, they were for something else. Day 3 was when the twins stopped speaking in whispers. They began asking questions. But not the kind of questions children ask. No wonderings about candy, animals, or angels. They asked about names that had been erased. Where is Magda Ellison? Who built the 3rd tunnel? Why did the Ashford boy drown if he could not swim? No one remembered telling them those stories. In fact, no one remembered those stories at all. The names weren't in the church logs, not in the town ledgers, not in the minds of the people who had lived there for 50 years. And yet, when the girls spoke, old men collapsed. Elder women dropped their plates. And silence fell, not like a fog, but like a judgment. You have to understand something. This wasn't a haunting, this wasn't demonic possession, this was something colder, the kind of force that doesn't shatter windows or make heads spin, it just knows, and it reminds you what you've hidden, even from yourself. By dusk, the mayor had tried to remove them. Sheriff Darnell, a man who had shot 6 in the war and buried his sins under whiskey, took both girls in his arms and drove them 15 miles out of town. When he returned, he looked wrong. His mouth didn't quite close, his eyes didn't quite blink. He said only 5 words. They were already waiting there. The next morning, the twins were back on the Morrison porch. Same dresses, same smiles, same bare feet, and a question written in charcoal on the wood behind them. Why do you worship the liar? No one dared to ask what it meant. Not then. But Pastor Worthing's hands shook during his sermon. He kept glancing at the back of the chapel, as if expecting a visitor he could no longer deny. Some said the girls were part of a curse. Others believed they were angels. But the truth? The truth is worse. They weren't here to punish. They were here to unseal something buried deep. Something the town had built its church on top of. The twins weren't the message. They were the key. It was on the 4th night that the digging began. No one was ordered to do it. There were no torches, no council meetings. But one by one, the men of the town, fathers, deacons, storekeepers, found themselves walking toward the old chapel with shovels in hand, as if compelled. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They just dug. Behind the church, near the place where no grass had grown for 20 years. a patch of land the town children called the listening spot. The twins had been seen there, sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, as if waiting. By dawn, they had struck stone, old, carved, covered in symbols no one could read. Some said it was a crypt. Others whispered the word, altar. That morning, Pastor Worthing locked himself inside the church and wept. When the deacons broke the door down, he was holding an old book. Not the Bible, something far older. Bound in hide, not leather. No title on the cover, just a burned handprint. He said one thing before they dragged him out. We swore never to look beneath. He was taken to the infirmary. He never spoke again. That same night, the twins appeared at the foot of Widow Harper's bed. She'd lived through 6 husbands and 2 plagues, and was feared more than loved. But when she saw the girls, she screamed like a child. Not because they threatened her, but because they named her guilt. They whispered 3 words into her ear, and her body rejected them. She coughed black until sunrise. And when the doctor arrived, her tongue had turned to ash. It was clear now. The twins weren't just revealing secrets. They were extracting them, calling out sins no man had confessed, because some sins aren't just personal. Some are communal. And the town of Greywick had buried more than bones. When the stone was lifted on the 5th day, they found not a body, but a hollow chamber, lined with mirrors, and in those mirrors the men saw versions of themselves they did not recognize, or rather, did not want to. The twins stood at the edge and whispered again. This time no one asked what they said, because every man felt it in his spine. By the 5th night the town had lost sleep and shape. Men no longer shaved, women no longer gathered, children stopped playing in the fields. Something was pressing down on Greywick, like a fog that had thought. The twins no longer walked the streets. They floated through them. Not literally, perhaps, but the way they moved, it made dogs whimper and birds fall silent. No one had seen their parents, no school records, no birth certificates, just 2 small girls with mismatched eyes and voices too steady for their age. Sheriff Merton tried to arrest them, not for any crime, but because doing something felt better than doing nothing. He walked into the parsonage where they'd been taken, hand on his revolver, badge gleaming. He never walked out. The next morning, they found him in his office, asleep at his desk, his hair turned white, his lips stitched shut with thread pulled from his own uniform. He wrote one thing before he lost the ability to speak. They don't punish you. They reflect you. That phrase spread like fire across town. And that's when the confessions began. Old Man Harper, who'd always been the one to lead Sunday prayer, walked naked into the town square and begged to be nailed to a tree. Why? Because 30 years ago he helped build the thing they buried. He never said what it was, only that it wasn't born of man. Mrs. Lowell, the midwife, swallowed a bottle of lye. She'd helped the town deliver children, and helped it undeliver others. Everyone had something. And those who claimed they didn't? The twins came to them at night. They never broke windows. They never touched the locks. They simply appeared, and the house would change. One family woke to find every mirror in their home shattered, except one. That one showed the entire family so. Standing still, except the father, who blinked twice every minute, and smiled. He was gone by morning. But the smile remained, burnt into the glass. People began to whisper a word that hadn't been spoken in decades. The reversal. An event the elders swore never happened. A punishment not from above, but from within. Something was unearthing the town's old disease. And the twins, they weren't the carriers, they were the cure. By the end of that week, the town's oldest survivor, a blind, mute woman named Esther Reeve, began to speak. She hadn't uttered a word in 41 years. But as the church bell rang backwards one Sunday morning, upward tone first, like time unravelling, Esther stood up in the middle of service, eyes rolled back, and said, "They have come again, just as we asked, just as we feared." People gasped. Reverend Colin dropped his Bible. The pages wouldn't stop turning, even after he let go. Esther went on, 2 for the price of 1, 1 to see, 1 to show, 1 to rip open, 1 to sew shut. The blood debt is active. You did not bury it deep enough. Then she collapsed. By the time the townspeople reached her, Esther was dead. Not of any wound, but old age caught up all at once, skin flaked, teeth gone, fingernails curled into her palms. Like something had pressed fast forward on her mortality. That night, the townspeople gathered in the old barn, the only place left untouched by the twins. They lit candles, drew circles, spoke old prayers, but no one admitted to knowing what the prayers meant. Somewhere in the distance, a fiddle played, a tune no one recognized. Yet all remembered. Then the doors blew open. The twins stood at the threshold, not smiling, not angry, just waiting. The air inside dropped 20 degrees. They didn't speak, but everyone heard the same thing. You knew this would happen. You fed the roots. Now the fruit is bitter. Reverend Colin tried to scream, but his voice came out as someone else's, a child's voice, begging, pleading. Someone whispered, "They're not punishing us. They're showing us." And that's when the barn started to bleed. Yes, the wooden walls seeped something dark and red. The floorboards softened like flesh. One man touched the exit door and screamed, said it had a pulse. Then the lights went out. When they came back, the twins were gone, but in their place sat 2 black dresses, still steaming. Inside each, a set of baby teeth, perfectly arranged, and stitched across the inside collar, 1 to remember, 1 to remind. After that night, something in Ashland changed. Not gradually, but as if the laws beneath the town had been rewritten. Clocks refused to tick past 3:11 a.m. Dogs howled at empty wells, and every mirror in town cracked in the same corner, upper left, like an eye had blinked too hard. The people tried to return to normal, but normal didn't return to them. crops spoiled in ways nature couldn't explain. Corn husks filled with black feathers, pumpkins with teeth inside. Children began drawing strange shapes on walls, interlocking spirals, with 3 tiny eyes at the center. They didn't know where they'd seen them. Some said it was the twins. Others said it was the thing that made the twins. A journal was found behind the altar of the church, bound in leather, written in a hand no one remembered owning. Its pages detailed a ritual called the twinning, describing how every few generations the town would be offered a mirror pairing. 1 twin to draw the sin, 1 twin to hold it. If the vessel is broken, the sin spreads. Then, in the margins, a warning scratched in with something not ink. Never separate them. That same week, Reverend Colin was found at the edge of the forest, barefoot, humming, and laughing into the dirt. He had carved spirals into the trees with his fingernails, all in pairs, all bleeding. When questioned, he simply repeated, "I tried to lock the door, but the door wasn't real." They took him to the asylum in Lexington, but he didn't survive the ride. His body collapsed as if emptied. No wounds, no trauma, just gone. Inside his mouth, they found a piece of parchment. It read, "The twin is not a child. The twin is a key, and the lock was never yours to guard." Back in Ashland, the town's twins began to vanish. Every family with a pair, gone overnight. No sign of struggle, no footprints, just empty beds, and on each pillow, a single hair ribbon tied in a noose. It was clear now, what had returned wasn't just vengeance. It was an old agreement, broken, and something had come to collect. What no one outside Ashland knew, what even the state archives had quietly misplaced, was that the town had faced a similar darkness before. In 1791, a preacher named Elijah Morin arrived from the East. He was young, charismatic, and strange, a man who spoke of heaven with a smirk and of hell with a kind of nostalgia. He built the first chapel himself, stone by stone, no help. Witnesses claimed he never slept. And when twins were born that year, 3 sets in a single month, Reverend Morin took it as a sign. He said the town had been blessed. But his sermons quickly turned esoteric. He spoke of reflections that bleed and echoes made flesh, of double-borns sent not by God, but by a silence older than creation. He began holding midnight gatherings in the woods. No one knew what occurred, but those who attended returned changed. They spoke in hushed tones, avoided mirrors, and no one, not once, spoke of the twins again. Within 6 months, the chapel burned to the ground. Morin was never seen after that night. His Bible was found in the ashes, its pages hollowed out. Inside, a single dried eye. Not human, not animal. The incident was buried. The town rebuilt. The children who survived were never quite right. But here's where it grows darker. That same dried-eye relic resurfaced in 1834 in the possession of Reverend Colin. He claimed he'd found it hidden inside the base of the pulpit, wrapped in a cloth that bled when touched. He had it studied, but every physician who examined the eye either went blind or vanished. One wrote a single note before losing his vision. This is not an eye, this is a memory, preserved and watching. From that moment on, Colin stopped preaching doctrine. He preached warnings, spoke of the cycle, the offering, the cost, but the town didn't listen. They were too busy preparing for the twins' 10th birthday, a celebration that never happened. Because the night before, the bells rang 13 times, and a man in a black cloak, no face, no shadow, was seen entering the twins' home. Only he came back out, and in his hand a mirror still dripping. The town woke to absolute silence. No birds, no wind, no dogs barking. Just a stillness that sat heavy on the chest like an omen. The twins' house stood wide open. Doors flung apart, curtains billowing, though there was no breeze. No one dared go in until midday, when Reverend Colin returned. He was pale, shaking, and his hands were wrapped in bandages, soaked through with blood. He said only one word: "Gone." The sheriff's men eventually entered the house. What they found was not a crime scene. It was something else entirely. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just a spiral pattern of ash on the bedroom floor, centered exactly where the twins' beds once stood. On the ceiling, burned into the plaster, were the words, "They saw themselves and saw too much." The mirror the cloaked man carried was found resting on the windowsill, shattered, but the shards were all facing upward, as if reflecting something that wasn't there. The search that followed was both fevered and futile. They dragged the river, tore up the fields, hired trackers from Tennessee who turned back halfway through and refused to speak of what they saw. Whispers spread that the twins weren't taken. They had been claimed, and that this was not the first time, nor the last. Reverend Colin was found days later in the chapel, kneeling before an altar of mirrors. He had gouged out his own eyes, murmuring, "They showed me what I couldn't forget. I saw the original face, before faces were made." He was locked away in an asylum 2 counties over. His final scribbled note read, "They are not 2, they are 1, divided by time, not by birth, and time always corrects itself." The note was signed not as Colin, but with a name no one recognized, E.M., Elijah Moran. As if something ancient had returned. That's when the elders of Ashland, those few still alive who remembered 1791, called a meeting. No minutes were kept, no records, but the following morning every mirror in town was smashed, and in the years that followed it saw no twins were ever born again. But one thing did start to happen. People began vanishing, always in pairs, always near reflections. You don't track this kind of disappearance with numbers, you track it with silence, with how often people stopped saying certain names, with how houses sat untouched, covered in dust, doors always locked, yet never sold. You track it in the way folks began turning mirrors to the wall. 2 school teachers vanished in 1837, a brother and sister in 1841. By 1849, even U.S. Marshals avoided the region unless absolutely necessary. What they all had in common? The moment before they vanished, someone saw them near a mirror, window, or body of water, something reflective. They were seen staring at it, but not at themselves, through themselves, as if something on the other side had finally answered back. A scholar from Ohio, Dr. Lucian Hale, arrived in 1852 to investigate. He believed in cognitive convergence theory, the idea that identical thought patterns could tear holes in time if repeated often enough. He said the twins might not have been special at all. It is not what they were, he wrote, but what they were taught, the songs, the mirror games, the phrases, rituals disguised as childhood rhymes. That's how you plant a code into a child. His final theory, the children were not victims. They were the key. He left town after only 7 days, refusing to discuss what he'd found beneath the twins' floorboards. Some say it was a second mirror, still intact, reflecting something not of this world. Others say it wasn't a mirror at all, but a blackened pool of water fed from beneath the house by an underground spring. The spring has never been found. But rumours claim a man returned in 1860 with equipment and vanished the next morning, leaving behind only his compass, spinning in every direction at once. What was once dismissed as madness began to take shape as something far worse. An intelligence. Something that had waited until the children said its name. Whatever E.M. had known, whatever Elijah Moran had tried to erase, it was back, and it was no longer content to be seen. Now it wanted to cross over. Through the children, through the mirror, through us, through the... By the time the Civil War broke out, the town near the Moran estate was already a ghost. Not from violence, not from plague, but from a shared forgetting, as if the place itself had been redacted from memory. Church records from 1865 list dozens of deaths, with no cause. Just a single mark next to each name, a dash. No illness, no violence. Just gone. That year, a Union scout named Jasper Gellert passed through the region and noted something chilling in his journal. The silence here is not natural. The birds do not sing, dogs do not bark, and not a single window holds a reflection. It's as if the world refuses to look at itself. He described a house with 2 cradles still rocking, even though no children lived there. A piano playing 3 notes over and over, long after the keys had been broken. And scrawled above a fireplace mantel, in what he believed to be Old Latin, were the words, "Speculum non est lux, aperire est perire." The mirror is not light, to open it is to perish. By 1870, the government sent a geological survey team. Only one member, a cartographer named Edwin Bell, returned. He would never speak publicly of what they found, but he sent a sealed letter to his wife. "We were fools. We thought it was just land, just a settlement, but we found the basin, the place where their house had been, and below it, water, deep, black, moving in ways water should not. It made no sound, but we all heard something. It knew our names." After that, no more expeditions were authorized. The area was quietly removed from most public maps. Postal service stopped. Property lines were erased. A zone of silence formed, officially unnamed, unofficially cursed. To this day, satellite imagery refuses to process clearly. Drones malfunction over it. Animals avoid it. And locals will not say the twins' names out loud, because deep down they remember something the rest of us have forgotten. Not all reflections are yours. Sometimes the thing in the mirror is older than you, more patient, and waiting for the moment you forget it's there. In 1901, a new kind of man arrived in Kentucky, not a preacher, not a lawman, not a local. His name was Dr. Elias Winthrop, a psychiatric researcher from Boston claiming to investigate cases of shared generational trauma in rural communities. But according to recently unearthed letters, Winthrop's true aim was far more esoteric. He wasn't looking for trauma. He was looking for mirrors that remember. In his journal, he references a theory known only among fringe psychological circles at the time. The reflective field hypothesis claimed that certain mirrors, under certain conditions, could record moments of extreme emotional energy, not as memories, but as spatial phenomena, echoes that live inside the glass, waiting to be triggered. He had heard whispers of the twins, how they used mirrors to communicate, how reflections persisted when no one stood near. To Winthrop, this was more than folklore. It was proof. He travelled to the edge of the redacted zone, offering money to locals for information. Most refused. One elderly man, however, name unknown, took him aside and handed him a cloth-wrapped object. Inside, a mirror shard no larger than a child's hand, cold as bone, and wrapped in a page from an 1834 Moran family Bible. Etched in blood-red ink was a phrase in archaic Greek: anamnesis estin he catastrophe. To remember is the catastrophe. The moment Winthrop touched the shard, something shifted. His writing became erratic, his sketches, once scientific, turned primitive. Screaming faces, reversed anatomy. A child with two faces and no eyes. Witnesses say he spoke in backward sentences during sleep and wept in front of any mirror. And then, one night, he disappeared. No sign of a struggle. No note. Just his clothing on the floor, and the mirror shard perched upright, balancing on its edge. As if placed there, deliberately, a single message was found.
Scrawled on his cabin wall in soot. They do not live in glass. They live in the space behind the moment of seeing. No one has decoded it fully. But every few years, someone in the region reports the same thing. A reflection that smiles before you do. Or worse, one that doesn't smile back at all.
If the legends are to be believed, then something inhuman was born in those woods in 1834. Not just two children, but a mechanism, a device of perception, a loop. Locals now refer to the area where the Moran estate once stood as the Hollow Gate. No map marks it, no trail leads to it, but if you follow the birds, watch which direction they refuse to fly, you'll find it. And when you do, you'll know. The trees grow in a spiral. The wind spins inward. And at the center, the silence is so complete you can hear your own heart thinking. That's where the twins were last seen. But here's where things get darker. In 1978, a documentary crew from Louisville attempted to investigate. Funded under the guise of a rural folklore study, they carried reels of film, EVP recorders, and an obsession with debunking the story. They lasted 3 days. What they captured before the film burned mid-development was described by a surviving assistant as a recursive event of visual violence. One twin appeared to walk forward while the other walked backward into the same body. When they touched, the camera glitched. The final frame recovered showed the crew member filming himself, but his reflection, caught in a metal thermos, was staring directly at him. That reel was confiscated by men in unmarked uniforms the following day. not military, not police. They carried leather cases and never blinked. 3 members of the team were hospitalized for catatonic mutism. One of them, nurse reports say, kept repeating a phrase with her eyes closed. I saw my face, and then I saw the thing wearing it. Ever since that failed expedition, stories from the region have become more specific, more ritualistic. People don't go missing randomly. They go missing on the day they remember something they were told to forget. No signs of struggle, no trails, just the echo of a twin whisper. Sometimes eared through mirrors, sometimes heard in your own voice. It's as if the twins never died. They just rewound, and they're still playing out the same scene, looking for anyone foolish enough to watch it all the way through. The deeper you study the twins, the more you realize this was never just about a haunting. This was about a doorway. A loop, yes, but also a design, a sentient intelligence embedded in a bloodline, a region, and a symbol. And that symbol, it wasn't a cross, it wasn't a cult. It was a double helix, etched in the bark of trees, carved in the Moran barn beams, and mirrored in the skeletal posture of the twins in their final known drawing. They weren't born possessed. They were born as keys. And Kentucky, for all its quiet wilderness and rural innocence, has always hidden something beneath the surface, beneath the coal veins, beneath the church hymns, beneath the carefully rewritten records of the 1834 census. That year, there were 2 names struck from the birth rolls. They weren't listed as infants, they were listed as unclassifiable entities. No birth weight, no physician signature, just coordinates, and a Latin phrase, per duplitem speciem transitum. Through the twin form, the crossing. The Moran family had been tasked with one thing for generations, containment. But something went wrong. A gate was opened, not sealed. And what came through wasn't a demon or a ghost, it was a principle. Something that infects understanding. Every person who's tried to document this story has gone missing, gone mad, or gone inward, speaking in mirror language, repeating things they've never learned but always seemed to know. This isn't about the twins anymore. It's about the system they belong to, a self-replicating system of symbols, timelines and consciousness, a parasitic myth that spreads through attention. It doesn't kill you. It rewrites you. It replaces your memories with possibilities. And then, like the second twin always did, it watches you from behind, waiting for you to realize, well, you've become part of the story. Why do you think so many researchers vanish without trace? Why do you think so many locals stop talking after a certain point in the tale? Because the moment you understand what the twins really were, you invite their gaze, and once they see you, you're already on the path to the hollow gate. The hollow gate isn't marked on any map, but it's real. It's not a place you find with your feet. It's a pattern you unlock with your mind. In 1952, a cartographer working for the U.S. Geological Survey was assigned to chart the old Moran property, an area long abandoned, legally erased, and surrounded by the kind of silence that locals don't break. Within 2 weeks, he quit the agency, disappeared from public life. When his grandson finally tracked him down, he was living in a basement apartment, walls covered in spirals and phrases like, not a place, an equation. He never spoke above a whisper, except once. They dreamed it into being, he said, and now it dreams us. That's the hollow gate. Not a portal, a reflection. It exists where patterns meet. Trauma, twins, recursion, silence and belief. The more you understand, the closer it gets. Not physically, conceptually. The Moran twins weren't the first to pass through it, but they were the first to come back. Incomplete. Because what the Hollow Gate does isn't transportation, it's translation. It takes what you are, disassembles it across infinite timelines, and lets something else pick up the pieces. Something that wears your memories, your voice, even your smile. But inside, it's just echoes. And that's what the older twin became, a beautiful imitation of something once human, once whole, but now hollow. And here's where it gets worse. Once the gate was opened, it never really closed. Others have seen it, felt it, dreamt of the endless hallway, the static hum, the mirror at the end that doesn't reflect you, but shows your double standing behind you, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. That's why the twins couldn't be separated. Because one was the anchor and the other was the echo, one born from flesh, the other born from pattern. If you've listened this far, you're already on the edge. Not because as you believe, but because something is listening back. And the Hollow Gate? It opens easiest for those who think they're only observers. There's one last detail, the kind everyone forgets until it's too late. In 1834, when the physician finally fled the Moran property, he left behind his journal. It was recovered in 1902 by a land surveyor who went mad 6 months later and was institutionalized for writing endless numbers on the walls. When translated, the journal revealed a chilling final entry. The younger twin is gone, the older twin watches me while I sleep. Her reflection moves when she does not. The house breathes now. The house breathes now. Not metaphor, not madness, a warning. The structure on the Moran land had changed. Witnesses in the early 20th century described rooms that shifted positions overnight, doors that reappeared, hallways that led nowhere by daylight, but somewhere else by night. And most disturbingly, they all agreed. The upstairs nursery had no windows, yet was always lit by a cold silver light. Like moonlight, without a source. That nursery is where the twins were last seen. And even though the house is long gone, burned to ash in 1946, people still hear the lullaby at night. A melody no one remembers learning, but everyone knows how to hum. What happened in 1834 wasn't an isolated event. It was a seed, planted in the mind of a child, nourished by silence and watered by ritual. The kind of ritual that didn't need candles or Latin or blood. Just two children, a mirror and faith. Faith in what? In return, because something came through the hollow gate. And it didn't come alone. It came with knowledge, a map hidden in genetics, in dreams, in recursion. Some say it's waiting for a convergence, a moment when enough people know the pattern, when belief becomes mass, and mass becomes gravity. And gravity pulls things back. That's why the names appear on walls, why some twins never speak, why some mirrors fog only on one side. It's happening again, and now you know, which means it knows you. So tonight, when the room goes quiet, when your reflection feels just a second out of sync. Don't look away. But whatever you do, don't hum the lullaby.